Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Let's go to the UN, shall we? The General Assembly is in session. It's October, and I haven't been in touch with anybody who's been there. So I want to talk to my friend Yeshua Moser-Puangsuwan, who is at the First Committee, has been attending things having to do with the First Committee of the General Assembly. And I don't know how long you've been there, but hi, hello. How are you doing, Yeshua?
Hi, Meta. I've been here 2 days. The First Committee started late this year due to financial deficit. So they cut some days off of it. And the First Committee, of course, is the Committee on Disarmament. And we're in a very sad situation right now where, in particular in Europe, they want to dump more and more of their people's money into the purchase of weapons. And so this has been a really difficult issue, and a lot of people have been bringing it up. A lot of government representatives are talking about that, how the world is a much more dangerous place right now due to the acquisition of weapons, which in most cases everyone blames on somebody else. We wouldn't want to do it. It's because of them that we are forced to do it. And at the end of every session, there is what I call screaming, where North Korea bounces off of criticism, Russia bounces off of criticism, Israel bounces off of criticism, and basically tells everybody else that they got to get their head on straight and get behind them. Otherwise, all hell's going to break loose. So it's been a really, really difficult place to work this year. I knew that before going there, and I've been surprised how difficult it's been. Now, I'm representing the international campaign to ban landmines at the meetings, and we have had 5 countries withdraw from our convention. The first withdrawals that have ever happened from a humanitarian disarmament convention.
Which countries have withdrawn? Which countries have withdrawn?
The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and together with Finland and Poland, all of whom said that the border situation between them and Russia has deteriorated to the point where they're forced to withdraw from the mine ban treaty and either lay mines on their border or prepare to lay mines on their border. So they have withdrawn from that convention, and we have been asking governments to encourage them to halt those withdrawals and come back to the convention. I mean, for the small states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, if you're over 40 years old, you remember occupation by Russia. And so it's an emotional issue for people. We get that. And Russia is not being kind to its neighbors. But the population of Estonia or Latvia would fit into St. Petersburg twice with room to spare. I mean, if Russia were so unwise as to choose to invade them, military defense by landmines is not really going to do much. The Russian army's breaching technology would make very quick work of it. So really the only thing that's going to save them is diplomacy and their alliances. But their military has to look like it's doing something, and they decided the something they'll do is lay mines on their borders. So this is not a rational issue. It's an emotional one, but we live in a post-rational world these days. And so I've been getting used to having very emotional discussions with people in the First Committee.
You know, it's easier for me to sympathize with them than it ever has been in previous wars. You know, it is, you say it's irrational, but on the other hand, I don't know what more they can do that really is realistic to try to prevent to defend themselves, you know? I mean, how,
Well, it's their alliances. Their
huh?
alliances. They need to depend on their alliances and their friendships with other countries
Yeah.
to have a viable defense. A singular weapon, the anti-personnel landmine, is not going to save
Oh,
them.
of course. You're right. That's true. Absolutely.
And I do
But I
sympathize with
guess
their situation.
what I'm reacting to is the whole switch to militarism as a necessity, and the whole argument that yes, we have to have more weapons. You know, I can't remember a time when I would buy that argument. In almost any previous wars I've, or conflicts, I've thought, if you disarm, or if you cooperate, you're going to have more chance of success than if you don't. And I have trouble saying that now with when I'm thinking about Netanyahu and Putin, and and Trump sometimes. Trump
Yeah,
often.
well, we do not have a difficulty with the idea of self-defense by nations. Nations should keep their population secure. We don't challenge that idea. We don't challenge the fact that they've got a very bad neighbor in Putin and sympathize with that. And we understand, especially for the people in the three Baltic states,
Yeah.
anybody over 40 is going to remember occupation by Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So we get the emotions behind this, but who's going to be the first victims of these landmines? Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be refugees. There are refugees crossing the borders into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in a uncontrolled way. I don't call anybody illegal, but there are people who are leaving. And
Mm-hmm.
one of our state's parties, Croatia, which is removing its minefields, has had people who are fleeing to Europe for reasons of safety be injured and killed by the minefields there. And that's when they are fenced and marked. And still, it's refugees who would be the first victims of these landmines.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so it has been a tough week. Well, what is the most optimistic ending that you could reasonably expect or hope for at the first committee?
We do not want to see this withdrawal becoming a norm. It would mean that international humanitarian law is something that's nice in peacetime, but once armed conflict starts, well, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have people withdrawing from the biological weapons convention, the chemical weapons convention. Where is the limit here? International humanitarian law is supposed to be, it's not supposed to be a restriction. It's supposed to be the floor which we don't sink beneath.
Mm-hmm.
So what this has the problem, this is starting to question that whole assumption. Well, maybe there is no floor. Maybe there is no limit. So this is a really slippery slope, and we don't want to see anything more going into that. So we are asking our member states to our convention to ask those states to reverse their withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen in the short term. I've been in my own discussion with representatives of those governments, some of them in the last 2 days, and I've said, well, you live in a democracy and you need to protect that democracy because we don't have a lot of democracies. And in democracies, we talk. Your withdrawal may be reversed by your own people. And one of the ones I was talking to today, he said, yeah, that could happen. I
Oh,
would be happy
really?
for that.
Would they?
I
I'm
mean, he didn't
sorry.
see it happening tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
I can't go into depth in the conversation, but he acknowledged that the people in a democracy decide. And so a reversal could happen if people started talking about it and say, is there another way we can do our defense? I don't see that happening tomorrow. I don't see a groundswell for that, but that's a possibility. And those are democracies, and we need to protect the functional democracies that we have left in the world.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, when that was happening, the withdrawal, at some of those states, or maybe it's more than one, there was some questionableness about the procedure, that it was done unilaterally by the Defense Department without consulting their own foreign ministry or something like that, which made the whole decision sound maybe debatable. Am I remembering correctly or not?
In the case of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the three defense ministers did get together, issue a public communique saying we need landmines, and they did it outside of their intergovernmental channels. I mean, they just came together, and then one of those foreign ministries, the Estonian one, publicly released this communique. So this is those ministers of defense getting together and saying, this is the direction we want to go. So they started it doing it that way. It did go in front of every one of those parliaments, and those parliaments decided that. And those are democracies. The people decided that in those countries. So that cannot be argued with. We do question the fact that those ministers of defense started it that way and lobbied heavily for it within their parliaments. And there were very few other voices that could be mobilized in that period of time. Most of our campaigns in Europe wound down after those countries joined the Mine Ban Treaty. We didn't have a lot of trained activists on the ground. And so the ability to organize some pushback against the military was limited on our side. But no, it went into their parliaments eventually, and the parliaments discussed it at some level and passed it. So that's a democratic process. We can't argue with that. We do find it very questionable the way those defense ministers got together and issued a public communique, but it did go to the parliaments.
I did not introduce you properly to mention the fact that your connection with the Landmines Treaty Organization, because that obviously is the reason you're focusing so much on the landmines, and probably the reason that you're in New York in the first place. Is that fair to say that you're there to look at the effect of the situation about landmines during the General Assembly, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, bless you, my dear. And how long are you going to be there? And then you're going, as I understand it, I know you live in British Columbia about half of the year, and you live also in Bangkok. And so I believe you said you're going shortly from New York to Bangkok, where you'll spend some time. Tell me, is that what is your game plan?
Well, I'll be here for a couple of weeks, and then I'll be pretty much transiting directly back to Bangkok.
Mm-hmm. And what are you planning to do there? I mean, you're going to spend 6 months or so there?
I will.
Mm-hmm.
I do that every year.
Yeah, I know. Okay. And so I want to get you, you and I haven't talked in a long time, and frankly, I haven't even been keeping up with many of the relevant peace activities going on in British Columbia among my other friends either. So I'd like for you to give me kind of a briefing of what I've been not paying sufficient attention to in BC. And then also there's, I need a whole course on what is going on in Southeast Asia, in Bangkok and the other neighboring countries. So let's back up and you've got to update me on what I've been missing in Canada itself lately.
Well, I'm probably not best placed to do that. It'd be better to focus on Southeast Asia because professionally I have to focus on that. And a lot of my time and attention goes into Southeast Asia, even if I'm not present there. So it would be better to focus on Southeast Asia.
All right. Okay. So I know that there are chronic problems or endemic problems of political legitimacy in Thailand. And there are always governments rising and falling, and government and prime ministers fleeing and whatnot. Give us a kind of a picture of that drama. I don't really understand much about it.
Well, what has been in the news recently was a border war between Cambodia and Thailand in July. Lasted for 4 days and was the most severe armed conflict between those two countries in decades.
Mm.
The proximate cause is a dispute on some small pockets of land along their shared border on the Dong Rek escarpment between Cambodia and Thailand. Much of the border is demarcated. Everybody agrees that's Thailand, this is Cambodia, but there are a few spots along there which they don't agree on. And this goes back to the colonization of Southeast Asia by France. France left a series of maps which nobody in Cambodia nor Thailand was consulted on. And so some of that area, Thailand has occupied since French colonization in Southeast Asia. But it's the French maps marked that. They said, well, this is part of our colonial area. And Thailand disputes that. Cambodia says, well, the French left it to us, it's ours. Thailand says, it's a colonial power, imposed those borders, we want to negotiate. So this situation has been there since the decolonization of Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam by the French. But it only relates to the Cambodian border. And from time to time, they have the Cambodians push into the area, the Thais push them back, a few shots are fired. This has been going on for quite a while now, at least 20 years. There's been occasional sniping across the border. Occasionally somebody gets injured. But in May, it resulted in a death of a Cambodian soldier. And so the tensions were high between the two countries. In mid-July, nobody knows who fired the first shot. Well, somebody probably does, but nobody in the news media or the politics really knows who fired the first shot. And it just escalated like mad. And prior to that, they had both moved a lot of military equipment up to the border. And so it was very, very heavy exchange of munitions, rockets, airdrop bombs. It was significant armed conflict. And they asked for Malaysia's assistance in brokering a ceasefire between the two. The ceasefire has basically held to today. Not much has really happened on resolving the issue.
Well, are there other issues, conflicts between the two countries?
Many.
Many.
What shall we call them? The hereditary political families of both countries. The Shinawatra clan in Thailand and the Hun clan in Cambodia used to be thick as thieves. They were very tight, and for reasons that also nobody I know. I mean, the rumor mill in Thailand is rife with what happened between the two, but clearly the Hun family was not happy, and they basically politically assassinated the Shinawatra clan. They're never going to recover from this. They're basically a spent force now in Thai politics. The prime minister that was part of the Shinawatra party was immediately removed from power by the Constitutional Court. And now a new caretaker government is in power in Thailand. There will be elections in January. So it was Hun Sen 10, Shinawatra 0 on that score right there. It was a politically shrewd move to get rid of the Shinawatras. I don't think it resolved any problems, but why did it happen? Well, Safe Money is on a financial deal between the two of them going bad, but nobody I know knows what that financial deal was. Some people say it has to do with the scam centers in Cambodia. Some people say it has to do with oil in the Gulf of Thailand. I don't know. But that's led to, well, changes in the political structure in Thailand. A progressive party will probably do very, very well in the January election. They hold the most seats in parliament. They're a very promising force, certainly the most democratic of any political party operating in any country in mainland Southeast Asia. Of course, that's a pretty low bar. You've got a one-party state in Vietnam and Laos. You've got a hereditary dictatorship in Cambodia, and you've got nothing but war in Myanmar. So the bar is pretty low. It doesn't take much to beat them out as a democratic force, but they do. There's actually a lot of hope to be given to this progressive political party called the People's Party.
Well, do you give any particular weight to it? Is, in your own opinion, is that really going to be a significant improvement in governance?
Well, we don't know. The People's Party has had 3 iterations now, and what we call the deep state in Thailand has pushed back against them because they're basically questioning the power of the monarchy and the military.
Mm.
And so the party has been disbanded twice, which means that all office holders within the party are banned from politics for 10 years. They won the last election, and immediately the person who was their prime minister candidate, cases were brought against them, and then the party was deregistered. Now it's in its 3rd reconfiguration, and they're prepared for that to even happen again, possibly. But they have gained more votes and more popular support, primarily from young people in Thailand who want to see a change.
Oh.
And so the chance of them sweeping the next elections is also quite good. And their platform is progressive. Their platform is good. It would bring positive change to Thailand, but maybe not for the deep state.
I see. Tell me about Myanmar. That's conflict. Well, the endless conflicts they have always had there. I don't see that much change, or I don't hear anything about it. And the whole thing about the Rohingya have, that's not on the news anymore. So what's the whole story about that drama?
It's sad. It's very distressing and depressing to look at what's happening in Myanmar today. The civil war has taken over more and more of the country. In the last year, there's been somewhat of a battlefield reversal between anti-military groups and the military and its allied militias in the country. That's primarily due to very strong support in weapons and training from China and Russia. So the military, which looked like it was collapsing under the weight of a military challenge by very many ethnic armed groups, plus a number of anti-military groups that had come up within the Burman ethnic group itself, had been pushing the military out of many parts of the country. Well, that process has stalled or reversed in most places except Rakhine State. The rebellion in Rakhine State is very strong, and they've pushed the military into a small corner, which it's going to be very hard for them to dislodge them from.
Now, you're going to have to tell me about that. Rakhine State is where the issue about the Rohingya.
This is.
Right.
And nobody is talking about them. They've just been dumped into Bangladesh, and um, there's less and less humanitarian assistance available anywhere in the world because the United States and the European powers are dumping all the money into arms. Um, and as a result, UNHCR is closing refugee camps in various places. Uh,
And almost all of the Rohingya now are in Bangladesh, not any left in. Who's fighting whom there now?
the Arakan Army, or sometimes the Araka Army, are fighting the Myanmar Armed Forces, and they've bottled them up into Sittwe and um, another port area. And they've basically taken control of all the rest of the state, including all of the areas where the Rohingya used to live. Um, they it's very, very difficult to tell what their attitude is towards the Rohingya. The Rohingya now have about 3 armed groups also operating in Rakhine State, and they are mostly fighting the Arakan Army, the ethnic Rakhine militia.
Mm-hmm.
In the refugee camps, the situation is not any happier for them. And the amount of money available for rations in the refugee camps is dropping. It's dropping by about 50%. So the situation for the Rohingya in the refugee camps is desperate.
God. And well, what hope is there? Where are they looking for some change?
Well, that's the question. The last thing Bangladesh needs is more people, but they've got their own governance problems now with Mohammed Yunus running a transitional government there and trying to straighten out things within his own country, which are volatile. And he's got his hands full. He doesn't really have the extra bandwidth necessary to do much progressively for the Rohingya people. And who is there on the other side of the border for him to negotiate with and deal with? There isn't really anybody. And India is dumping some Rohingya that went there back into Bangladesh from the Indian side of the border. So they really are stuck. They are a unwanted and forgotten people. Their situation is desperate. The only thing that differentiates them from the people in Gaza is nobody's dropping bombs on them from the sky. But otherwise, they've been abandoned. Their situation truly is desperate.
Oh my God. My God. I had heard something about a lot of them being located on a sort of an island that gets flooded or something. I'm not able to recollect exactly what that was, but I saw some pictures of this place that they were moving so many people. I don't know how many people were sort of dumped on that island. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. I couldn't tell you the numbers that are there. They've stopped relocations to that place because there's just been too many problems.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a reaction from governments. There was a lot of discomfort with the local population in Cox's Bazar of the impact of the Rohingya on them. So the government says, okay, we're going to move them out to this island. It was nobody liked the idea in the first place, and it's proved to be pretty bad. So they've stopped moving new people there, but the people who are there have to struggle in that situation. There's nothing positive they can do. That's an island, it's away from the rest of Bangladesh. There's no economy they can integrate into. They're totally dependent on support from outside. It's an open air prison.
Okay, now you mentioned Muhammad Yunus, which was a pleasure to hear his name, but I honestly have to confess I didn't know that he was running the country. The last I tuned into that region, there was the woman prime minister or whoever was giving him a hard time, and
Yeah,
he
Sheikh
was on.
Hasina.
Yeah, tell me about that and what has changed if now he's the head of the country. What's that
Well,
all
She
about?
Casino was thrown out by a popular youth revolt. The youth of Bangladesh rose up and basically threw her and her government out. They fled in helicopters to India, who have housed them ever since that time. And the youth demanded an interim government. And the youth actually called Mohammed Yunus back from Europe,
Okay.
where he had been living, and asked him to head the government.
Uh-huh.
And he's put a number of progressive people into the various positions, and he's trying to put together the country. Now, the country has got a lot of problems. So, like I said, he's got his hand full. He doesn't have a lot of extra time to spend on these
Hmm.
forgotten people down in Cox's Bazar.
Hmm. Yeah, but there are still people at Cox's Bazar, right?
Yeah, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, refugee camp in the world.
Hmm. Well, you know, things are not going to get any better globally, you know. Looks like the conflict that I see is all of the world practically is having right-wing governments in which the main issue seems to be how to keep out foreigners, you know, how to keep refugees and how to keep migrants that you don't, whose skin you don't like or something out. And these governments continue to flourish. And while it's clear that not only are a huge number of millions of people are refugees now, displaced people, but that it's going to get a lot worse. So, is there any systematic attempt through the UN or any place else that you know of to try to address the global problem as a global issue that needs to be considered internationally instead of uh, by right wing governments, individual national states?
Well, this is where the General Assembly, and one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed going there year after year, is a place of hope. Because the voices of sanity in there are the middle powers and voices from the South. They
Mhm.
get multilateralism. They understand that our problems are connected. And because they're almost all small countries, they know unless they work together with others, there isn't going to be a solution to the problem. And so that's where the sanity is. Because they are small countries, because many of them are in the South, and most of the media and attention focuses on what's going on in Europe and North America, their voices aren't heard so much. But every one of them has a vote in the UN General Assembly. And so when they speak in the UN General Assembly, they are saying all of these things. They are saying all of the right things, and they vote on the issues in that light. The veto of the Permanent Five does not count in the General Assembly. It's every country has a vote. And so they're able to move some positive stuff. Of course, most of it's not legally binding, but they are the voice of sanity in the world today. And those are our allies for our campaigns, the ones that we work with. Um, and and I really enjoy a lot of my conversations with them. I enjoy hearing what they have to say in the General Assembly. Anybody can tune into this on TV. So I encourage people to do so. Don't pay attention to what's said by Russia and the United States and China. This is pretty depressing stuff. Big power, everybody should do what we say and whatever. Listen to what the small governments are saying. Um, Listen to the voices from the South, the middle powers. They still understand all of this, and this is where our hope lies.
Well, okay. And okay, so they passed resolutions, let's assume, in the General Assembly. Is there any institutional or organizational or agency within the UN that has any um, resources and clout that could has any authority? My feeling is you mentioned disappointment with the with the status or the power of international law. And I think from my point of view, that's where we should be placing the most emphasis, is trying to re-establish that international law should have some real weight, and that we need to make it enforceable and so on. And in general, that is the effort. But I don't know of any power within the UN or any other. Of course, there's a World Bank and all of that, but the IMF and all that. But within the legislative or the judicial end of international negotiations, I'm not sure I see any organization that is working to create new legislation, new international law, or norms of any kind. Where would you pin your hopes for that kind of breakthrough?
Well, it is the moral authority of the UN and the voices that are in it. I mean, enforcement mechanism? No, there's not going to be one outside of the World Court and so forth. Um, the types of things that they bring up in the General Assembly, the resolutions they pass, even the big powers have to pay attention to them. They mostly pay attention to them by saying it doesn't affect us. But when you read the memoirs of some of these people in power later on, you see how much they really were affected by it. We don't see the results as swiftly as we would love to see them. But they are there. And so that's why I say the General Assembly is so important, because it's the forum where these voices get to be heard. It's the forum where these voices can propose things, and it's the forum where they can pass them. And that has moral and some level of real power in the world today. It's not enough. We all know that. That's really distressing. And people are dying today because of that. But it's virtually the only thing that we have right now.
Well, there is something else that's going on in the news, and I don't know what to make of it, and that is this ceasefire that's impending. That Trump claims to have made his mark in the world of peace building as having accomplished some sort of change in for the ceasefire between Gaza and or Hamas and Israel. What are people thinking about that and talking about that? Of course, I guess the disarmament committee is not necessarily the focus of where that conversation is going on, but you must hear a lot of discussion about it. What do you think?
I'm not hearing a lot of conversation about it. There is certainly condemnation from the states that you would expect condemnation from at the United Nations. Most of the Arab states are unified in their condemnation of Israel for its assault on the people of Gaza. The voices from other countries are a little less on that. When people do talk about it, they talk about it in the international humanitarian law framework, that not being able to do anything on this is, again, an attack on international humanitarian law. For Thailand, it's a very interesting issue because there were more Thais held captive by Hamas than any other nationality, besides Israelis. And the last Thai captive was only released 2 or 3 months ago on whatever the previous release by Hamas of captives was. And that's because Thais work on a lot of the kibbutzes in Israel. They are the foreign labor force. They are the Mexicans of Israel, if you. for a metaphor to describe their activities there. Um, so, needless to say, there was not a lot of support for the Palestinian cause in Thailand because of this direct negative impact
Yeah,
that they experienced in that conflict, which generally they get no news about whatsoever. So they don't really have any kind of framework to do an analysis of any depth. In Southeast Asia, you don't get a lot of news about the Middle East to understand the conflicts.
I see. One of the things strange is this flotilla, which I thought was a remarkably dramatic project. And I take the Globe and Mail, I take New York Times, I take the Washington Post, I have access to the LA Times, I watch the Guardian. They're not covering it. I don't understand. I think CNN did, but I haven't been watching it. But to me, that was an extraordinary project that I saw what looked like dozens or hundreds boats setting off, going into the Mediterranean to deliver, I don't know what all, certainly food and medicine, I suppose. And then they were intercepted and wasn't even covered. Now, what I don't understand. Why isn't that a dramatic event? Isn't that news?
Well, Al Jazeera did cover it very well, and they had a reporter embedded on one of the boats.
Oh,
Because I watch Al Jazeera a lot because most of the good journalists have left other news sources and moved to Al Jazeera. Their coverage on world issues anywhere, their coverage of Southeast Asia is excellent. Um, and it was covered there. It was a brilliant nonviolent direct action. It ticked all the boxes in that. It made Israel look horrible.
mhm.
So it was revealing the truth, as Gandhi says, a nonviolent action should reveal the truth, and it condemns the oppressor in the way in which it reveals the truth, and it did that. They were challenging the delivery of aid or the lack of delivery of aid by anyone,
Mhm.
um, and doing it. It was a people-to-people action, so it was just brilliant. They had about 50 boats this time because with lower numbers, they weren't able to get anywhere close to the shoreline of Gaza. The closest they got this time was, I think, 9 kilometers. So they got pretty close this time before they were intercepted by the Israeli Navy and hauled over to a port and their boats impounded. Um, Realistically, on those small boats, they couldn't deliver much in the way of aid. They didn't have that much over above the supplies they needed to keep their crews going. It was a symbolic action to challenge the lack of assistance, the lack of food aid, the lack of things that people need to survive and live that they needed. And it was a brilliant nonviolent action. The Israelis were very, very concerned about it. Um, And they did everything they could to keep it while it was still in European waters from ever getting close. But it was too many boats. They overwhelmed their ability to do that. The last ones, they had bombed the boats and they couldn't get anywhere near the Eastern Mediterranean. This time they just simply had too many ships. And so it was a brilliant nonviolent direct action and challenge to Israel's blockade.
Yes, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But what what does Netanyahu say when somebody says you're not supposed to starve people as an act of war? What is the conceivable rationale or justification or excuse for what they clearly were doing? Not only then, but of course they were shooting people who were trying to reach feeding stations, places where they could get rations, even in anywhere near Gaza. But this flotilla thing makes it so apparent that what they're doing is a violation of humanitarian decency, human decency. What kind of justification do they trot out to try to explain or, uh, what they're doing.
You'd have to ask Netanyahu. I have no idea what goes on in his mind. But, every agency we have that we can respect that has looked into the issue has said what is occurring there is a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to many Jewish friends about this. And what you have in place in the powerful position in Israel is a genocidal entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's an extremist entity. Zionism is a supremacist philosophy. And it is probably closer to the Jewish version of the Islamic State. It's a supremacist philosophy.
I never thought of
Um,
it that way, but yeah, it fits. Fits.
and I think just as though Nazism had to die for the German people to survive, Zionism will have to die for the Jewish people to survive. It's a deadly philosophy. It's nihilistic. Um,
And
so
yet,
it's
so far
extreme.
as I know, the great majority of people in Israel support the government on this. Still.
Well, I went to in Victoria, British Columbia at the synagogue there. I went to a live telecast that they broadcast in the synagogue of people in Palestine and in Israel together not celebrating, commemorating the losses of each side. And that was organized by Combatants for Peace, a group you probably know, people who were formerly in the IDF or in a Palestinian armed group who decided armed struggle is not the way to resolve our problems. And they cooperate together across the border in Palestine and Israel. And they have commemorations of each other's suffering. This is one of the things that they do together. And those are public events, and the public is put them and they broadcast them to each other over the border between Palestine and Israel. And we were showing that live at the synagogue in Victoria, British Columbia. I don't know how many other places this is done. The people who are refusing to fight in the IDF, the people who refuse to do their military service or refuse to do service in the occupied territories, those are the people that we need to respect and support in this. Just like the 1 million Russian people that you have who have fled Russia because they don't want to do their military service and are living in Armenia or Kazakhstan or various places like that, refusing to be a part of the war. These people need our support. We need to provide temporary asylum to anyone who refuses to do military
Now you're
service.
talking because I've been for the last 2 years, I think, every now and then, fitfully, I resume my pitiful effort to do something on behalf of those. I think of them as the men who fled rather than be mobilized to go kill Ukrainians. But of course, in many cases, they have their families and so on with them. They're not just men, but mostly, 1 million men apparently left Russia and for the most part are stuck in other countries. In the former Soviet countries, Kazakhstan or Georgia or, Uzbekistan and so on. They can't get papers to go where they want to go. Europe doesn't want them. North America, Canada might take some a little better than the U.S., but the U.S. is not friendly to them and so on. And I think we should be going out with garlands of flowers to greet these people arriving and bless them for wonderful policies and courage. But it sure isn't happening now. What has happened and how many there are of the parallel group in Gaza or rather in Israel. I don't know anything about that. How many are there, and is their situation comparable in terms of immigration and being recognized and honored for their stand?
Well, they're probably no more recognized and honored in by the Israeli government than the Russians are by the Russian government. Um, but I mean, the policy of Europe towards the people who are fleeing military service in Russia is appalling. Why are you sending weapons to the Ukraine to fight the Russian army when you could be undermining the Russian army by providing some type of temporary visa for them to stay while they organize the next Russian government from
Mhm.
exile? Um, this would be a sensible policy to me. But again, we live in a post-rational world. Um, and I think that this was an incredibly lost opportunity. Um,
Agree.
I met with some of the Russians who had fled in Armenia recently. I was there as part of the landmine campaign, but I met with some of the Russians who were refusing to do their military service and were living there, and their conditions are dire. They have exactly the problems you said. They don't have papers, they don't have money, they can't work in the formal economy. Their situation is very, very desperate, and yet they've made the right moral choice.
Exactly. Yeah. But the interesting thing to me is I've put on about four forums, discussions, a similar format for what we're doing. But I've had Russian, I call them escapees, men who have escaped from serving in the military, or putting it more honestly, going to kill Ukrainians. They refused to do that and they left, and then they're stuck. And I try to get officials, government officials, who will talk with them, and I can't get them to happen. That these organizations will not, the people will not, especially government people, but even local lawyers, international law experts, and whatnot. I can't get anybody to talk to these people. I went to Bob Ray, who is, of course, Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and is generally friendly to me and will be on my show when I ask him, and he agreed to talk about human rights and so on, which he works on at the UN, obviously. But he had to get permission from Ottawa to have a conversation with any of these Russian people, men, and he couldn't get permission. They said no. So he talked to me, but he couldn't talk to them. And I do not understand that. People, when asked what their reasoning is, their logic is that this group of people may include would-be spies, people who are maybe sent by the Russian government to somehow infiltrate Canada. I don't, I don't take that as a very likely story. And so I don't know. Do you have a better theory about why they are so, why everybody, including lawyers who are, private lawyers or in private practice or academics, they don't want to talk about it.
Well, I suspect there are manifold reasons, and they might be different for different individuals. There is the film recently that was not capable of being shown at the Toronto International Film Festival, about which you're probably familiar. It's called
No,
Russians at War.
I was
And
not. No.
the Ukrainian contingent in Canada, which is very strong, protested against it because they felt it humanized the enemy. Well, it really was an anti-war film. It was made by a Russian-Canadian filmmaker who unofficially embedded herself in with a Russian unit. And it showed that they were confused about why they were there and not feeling good about what they were doing. And they were dying. Um, and so it was a powerful anti-war film. Now, in British Columbia, Knowledge Networks just showed it, and they paired it back to back with 20 Days in Mariupol, which is also a very devastating film on the Russian just obliteration of a city and its people. And it was primarily filmed by the last two Reuters reporters that were in there, and then they were snuck out on the very last ICRC mission to take people away from Mariupol. Um, both of them are devastating films. They're hard to watch, and it's good to see them together because it just shows the absolute senselessness of this armed conflict.
Mhm.
But I understand, the Ukrainian contingent in Canada is very strong, and they had strong feelings about anything that showed the human side of their adversary. So I think these forces are at work in Canada. That's one thing that could be there. The fear of Russian infiltration of any exile community is real. They want to keep tabs on the people to see how they're organizing themselves. It's not a threat to Canada per se, but it's a threat to the immigrant community. And we've got plenty of examples of the Chinese and the Indians doing that in Canada. So,
Well, our time's about up, and I want to say goodbye because I may not talk to you for a few months if you are in Bangkok, although I don't know why we couldn't. What do you plan to do there? And yeah, you're going in a couple of weeks, right?
yeah. I will be looking at, for the international campaign to ban landmines, I will be looking at the situation of mine use in Myanmar. I'm currently preparing a map on the extent of the contamination of the country. There's also been an allegation of Cambodia using mines on the border with Thailand. Very, very disturbing and distressing allegation, and I will have to be doing some investigations into that. Outside of that, I expect to be enjoying excellent food and some time at the beach.
And I expect it would be fun to be in Bangkok. I haven't been there in a long time. All right, it's been lovely talking and getting caught up. I now am very smart. I know everything I need to know. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good few months, and maybe we can have a good conversation while you're there. Okay?
Okay, great talking to you, Meta. Bye now.
All good wishes, my dear.